In light of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the assuming of the throne of King Charles III and his coronation in May 2023, the monarchy and its role has again become a hot topic. The apolitical role of a constitutional monarch has been thoroughly cemented over the past century. However, there are always a few moments of exceptions, like the public disapproval of Queen Elizabeth II of the apartheid regime in South Africa, or the Finn Lion Charles III walked with his political activism during his tenure as crown prince. There is an understanding of political neutrality of the monarchy, but exactly where that line is something that each generation with every new monarch can determine for themselves, and there seems to be a stark difference between generations on where this line is supposed to be. When King Charles III just assumed his position as king, he was invited to deliver a speech at the 27th UN Climate Change Conference, the COP27 Climate Change Summit. In line with the very traditional interpretation of the role of a monarch, Prime Minister Liz Truss blocked Charles III from attending the conference. Yet, when the UK public was polled on this issue, there was an overall plurality supporting Charles attending, but with a clear generational divide present, with a large majority of young people supporting Charles and a majority of the elderly saying that attending was inappropriate. One of course must ask themselves if people were basing their opinions not on the basis of the limitations of monarchical power but on the issue of climate change, especially since this issue is generally perceived as much more important by young people than elders. Yet a similar poll a couple of years earlier, where the scope of the question was much broader, had similar results. The question did not just include environmental issues, but whether or not it would be appropriate for Charles to comment on all subjects he feels strongly about. The overall results were quite similar, with the plurality supporting political commentary and again with the same strong generational divide, with the young again supporting a more political monarchy. However, this time the political differences in the answers of the respondents are much less present, thus suggesting that in this poll people were not voting on the basis if they do or do not think specifically climate change is an appropriate issue for the king to speak on, but on the basis of how far monarchical power should reach to address subjects the monarch wants to talk about. Overall, there does seem to be a much greater tendency for young people to support a more political role for the monarch, a power which traditionally a constitutional monarch is not supposed to have. So let's find out, is a more politically active monarchy a good idea, and what would that look like? Right off the bat we can say that if Charles ever had any ambitions in becoming a political activist and publicly speaking out in favor or opposing any bills or laws discussed in parliament, that is just not going to happen. Nice try, Charles, but the monarchy simply doesn't work that way. Any political activism by the king has to be a lot more subtle and a lot less controversial than engaging itself in an ongoing public debate. He should only limit himself to issues which are way less controversial and enjoy much more public support, like human rights, and the way in doing so needs to be a lot more subtle. A perfect example of this is Queen Elizabeth II and the South African apartheid regime. The British Prime Minister at the time, Margaret Thatcher, opposed apartheid and worked behind the scenes to get it abolished, but did not go so far as to allow any trade embargoes to be placed upon South Africa, something which a lot of the other Commonwealth countries did want. It was leaked by an anonymous palace aide that the Queen is dismayed by Thatcher's lack of compassion for the people of South Africa, which was a huge statement to make for a monarch. This statement at the time was seen as controversial, and Queen Elizabeth even apologized to Thatcher later on. But looking back, I think we should all agree that this subtle but meaningful disapproval is what we would want from a monarchy. What legal instruments a monarch has to make their voice known in an appropriate manner is often a bit of a grey area. To have a look at a perfect recent example, we should look at a different country, to the Netherlands and its king Willem-Alexander. Determining where, when and if a king visits a different country is a bit of a legal grey area on who decides that. State visits are of course generally being planned by the Foreign Office or the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, but in the case of slightly less formal country and event visits, the king can be directed or recommended to go somewhere, but he can also have his own preference in going to a certain event or country. The Dutch king Willem-Alexander had a major hiccup when he planned to go on holiday in Greece, in the middle of the corona pandemic when his entire country was in a lockdown. This did not play well with the general public, and he had to cancel his trip entirely after major public disapproval. This is an example of a decision a king can make, but our perfect example was a bit later. During the Football World Cup 2022 in Qatar, the Dutch football team was playing exceptionally well and advanced well into the group stages and playoffs of the World Cup. Insofar so even that the Dutch government had to decide if and what kind of political representation they did want to send to the last few games of the Dutch team. The Qatar Football World Cup was rife with human rights abuses in the construction of much of its stadiums, and the Dutch parliament even agreed not to send any political representation to the World Cup when the news broke of those atrocities. Yet the situation now changed. Not only was it deemed important to support the nation's athletes when they were doing this well, football is the largest sport in the Netherlands by a huge margin, yet they had never won a World Cup. If the Netherlands were to win in the finals, it would be a major enough landmark that a Minister of Sport, the Prime Minister and even the King would sort of have to be there to celebrate it. And on top of that, it was the first winter since Russia invaded Ukraine, and the major gas shortages resulting from the boycott on Russia and Qatari logistical help in the evacuation of Afghanistan suddenly put huge importance on the necessity of friendly relations between the Netherlands and Qatar. A choice had to be made. Will the King go to the World Cup? Yes or no? The Dutch government already backtracked on their earlier decision and did send the Minister of Sport and Foreign Affairs to the World Cup and delayed the decision for if the King would go to the World Finals. So let's return to the original question. Should Charles III take a more political role? I myself would support that statement, albeit in a limited form. So allow me to explain how something like that would look like in practice, as I overlap with the target group as I am pro-monarchy and consider myself to still be young.
How do you do, fellow kids?
In my personal opinion, the role of a monarch has two major aspects. To be a unifier of its nation's people, and by connecting a nation to its history by acting as the personification of the nation and its moral character. I see the monarchy as something more than just an extension of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and in my opinion the perfect compromise in the situation would have been to send the Prime Minister to the finals of the World Cup, thus acknowledging the political reality and the reliance of the Netherlands on good relations with Qatar, but for the King, King Willem-Alexander, to put his foot down and personally choose not to attend the World Cup on his own merit. Because as the personification of the moral character of the nation, he could not in good consciousness be at the blood-stained World Cup. He would not have to make big press statements about him not attending, but something as subtle as him just not being there would fit the actions of a king, and that action would speak louder than words. Do you agree with young people in the United Kingdom that King Charles III, or all Western monarchs for that matter, should take a slightly more active role in political issues? Let me know what you think down in the comments and like and subscribe to see more content like this video.